you want a dashboard like this so you can track all of your server metrics, well, in this video, I'm going to show you how to do it and guide you through the entire process. Right, so for this, there are 3 services we are going to be using, and I'm going to guide you through each one. So first one, of course, Grafana, and that's going to be running in a Docker container. Now, if you don't have Docker set up or anything like that, I'll link a video somewhere, so go check that out. It pretty much just helps you get started with the whole self-hosting thing, so you know how you can go about installing Docker, why you need it, and why it's used. And then once you've got that all sorted, come back to here. So yeah, first one, Grafana. Second one is Prometheus. And Prometheus is where we will be sending all of the metrics, and it's all just being collected into Prometheus. And then we then point Grafana to Prometheus to, so we can send all of the metrics there. And now what's actually collecting all of our metrics for us and sending it to Prometheus is our third service, and that is Node Exporter. So just a really high cap, we have Node Exporter running on our server. It's collecting all the metrics, it's sending that to Prometheus, and then we will link Grafana to talk to Prometheus to then visualize all of that data in a nice way, like you've seen before. Now, this might sound confusing, and trust me, it can be a bit confusing, but I'm hoping I can guide you through the process to make it pretty straightforward. So the first thing that we're going to do is set up Grafana, and then we'll have the dashboard, and then I'll walk you through everything else. Also, just a really quick side note, I just wanted to say a big thank you for all of the support lately. If you ever get stuck on any of this, ask in the comments below or check out the Discord server, a link in the description, so check that out. There's a few of us in there now, and we'll be more than happy to help. Yeah, so just a big thank you. If you watch the videos and you're not subscribed, I really appreciate that. But enough talking, let's go and install Grafana. Right, so we are on my server at the moment. This is my Alzim server, so this is actually going to run all 3 services for us. And as I go along, I'll explain more in detail about each service and when you need to install it, where you install it, and all of that stuff. But we're just going to focus on the service at a time so it doesn't get confusing, okay? So first things first, Grafana. All of the stuff, all of the Docker Compose files, all of that will be in the description, but I also have a link to my book stack, which is essentially where I have all my documentation, so you can follow along and just get the more detailed Docker Compose file where you can copy and paste it, because the formatting in the YouTube description might be a bit off. So as you can see, we are in my server. This is my Alzim server, like I just mentioned, and I structure all of my Docker Compose files and all of that stuff in a Docker folder. So if I change into there, right, and do an ls, we can see I have a folder for each one of my Docker containers that I run. So I have a Grafana folder already. I would suggest making one, depending on how you do your Docker Compose files, of course. So I'm going to change directory into my Grafana and do an ls. So you'll see I just have the Docker Compose file in here. So if we just have a look at this, it's pretty straightforward. So you can see here, we're using the Grafana image, right? And our container name is going to be called Grafana. And it will just restart unless we stop it. So if our server restarts, Grafana will start up automatically. And we can see it's going to be on port 3000. Now, if this doesn't work for you, feel free to change it on this side here. So 3000, feel free to change that to a port that's not used. In my case, 3000 on our Zim, which is my server, is not being used. So 3000 is fine. And now all of the storage, all of the configuration, everything we do with Grafana is stored in a volume, and that volume is just called Grafana storage. And you can see that that volume is being declared here as well. So a volume will just be created, and that will live on my Alzim server. So even if the container gets destroyed, we can stand up a new one, point it to that volume, and all of our configuration will persist. Hopefully that makes sense. So here's our compose file, really straightforward and easy. All you need to do is copy, paste it into a file called docker-compose.yaml, save it, close out of it, do an ls, we have our Docker Compose file. So if you are at this point, all you need to do, providing you have Docker installed, and Docker Compose, of course, is run docker space compose up -d. Now, depending on, so whether or not you need the Docker hyphen compose or Docker space compose, it depends on which one you have installed. If you run Docker space compose and it says you don't have Docker compose installed, you probably have Docker hyphen compose, which is just, I'm pretty sure it's just an older version. The new one is Docker space compose. Feel free to get that installed if you don't have it. It just makes, I'm pretty sure it's the same thing, it just makes the login look a bit different. Anyway, all we need to do is hit enter. This is, I already have the Grafana image pulled, that's why you didn't see that happen. But you can see we now have a network set up, that volume, Grafana storage is now set up, and we have our container running. So if I do a docker ps hyphen, we don't need to do that, and then do a grep, and we look for Grafana. So we're just doing a search on all of my running containers, and we should see Grafana up and running. And we can. So it's up for 22 seconds ago. So let's try hit that on a web browser. So here's one I prepared earlier. So I just need to hit enter and this should load it. And there we go. Right, so we've just hit Grafana. So the default credentials is just admin and admin. So hit login. And then it's going to ask you to set a new password for your admin user. So just do that now. There we go. Hit submit. And now we are in Grafana. So it's pretty basic, right? It's kind of got some things here in the basics. So let me just zoom in a bit so you can see. So it's saying, hey, you should add a data source, right? We need data in Grafana to actually do stuff. We don't have any data at this point, and that's fine. So this is when our next steps will come in. So what we need to do now is set up Prometheus. So all of this is going to be in the description of the video, but so this is the installation page for Prometheus. Now, again, Prometheus just needs to run once, okay? And it's just where we're going to stand up a container for Prometheus, and Prometheus comes with like a configuration file, and I'll show you that in a second, where we can say, hey, look at this server in the config file for the metrics, and the metrics again are being exported by Node Exporter. So Node Exporter will run on all your servers, and then you're telling the single Prometheus server where to look. You know, hey, on this IP address, on this port, you'll find Node Exporter exporting some metrics. Grab those, and then we'll link it to Grafana. So Prometheus is just that centralized point where we're telling it to go out and grab the metrics from Node Exporter. Okay, so that's what's happening there. Again, any more questions, anything like that, jump in our Discord. I'm more than happy to help, or just read the documentation, which I'll have a link to as well. So you can see here, there's some commands here for deploying Prometheus. But I actually have a Docker Compose file, so I'm going to share that with you. But the idea is, again, we're just deploying Prometheus via Docker, and we will then also have a configuration file living on our server where we can just make the changes to Prometheus to add more servers and collect those metrics. If this is confusing, it's okay. I'm going to cover it in a second. We can cross off Grafana. Okay, we have Grafana running. You have a user that you can log into. Great. So all we need to do now is change directory. And in my collection of Docker containers, I also have one, which is Prometheus. So if you don't have that, you most likely don't, make that directory if you're following my sort of structure. And here, you'll see we have two files, okay? So we have a Docker Compose file. This is going to be provided for you. Either look at my book stack or in the YouTube description, okay? And if we just do a nano Docker Compose, you can see here that we have a compose file. And what's happening here? So we're setting up Prometheus, okay? We're calling the container Prometheus. We're telling it, on the deployment of Prometheus, we're doing a command flag here, and we're saying, hey, look, a config file for Prometheus where we will handle all the configuration. Then we will be providing a YAML file called Prometheus, okay? And then what we're saying is on port 9090, that's where Prometheus is going to be running, so make sure that's free. And we have a volume, so we're saying, hey, look, in this directory where I am right now, hence the dot, there's a folder called Prometheus, right? And link that to this directory here in the Docker container. Because inside Prometheus, that folder here that I have here, is that YAML file. So this will match. So when the Docker container starts up and it has that mount, etc. Prometheus, it will have that prometheus.yaml file in it because we're supplying it, okay? And all the configuration within it is all now in the container. If that doesn't make sense, it's okay. I'm going to show you it. And then all the other data for Prometheus is just stored in a volume called prom data, and we don't need to worry about that. That's all being handled for us by Docker, okay? So we have that. So let me just save this, close out of it, and let's have a look at that config file. So if we just do a change directory, again, I'll just do an ls so you can see. So we have that Prometheus file here, okay? That folder, sorry, it's a folder. So feel free to make this. So just make directory Prometheus, okay? We're going to change directory into it. and we'll do an ls and make this file, okay? The contents of this file, again, are going to be provided to you in my book stack and in the description of this YouTube video. Right, so this is the Prometheus YAML file, which contains all the configuration. So this here is what is going to be provided to you in the book stack or the YouTube description, so you can get set up with the configuration file. Now, I'm just going to cover this here. So what we can see here is some basic configuration of the Prometheus. So starting at the top, we can see that these ones here is Prometheus is going to scrape the metrics every 15 seconds. It's also got a timeout of 10 seconds. And then the evaluation of the rules is 15 seconds. And then we've actually got the main parts here, which is the scrape config. So where we're telling Prometheus to go and grab the metrics that we want to collect. Right, so there's one already supplied, which is the first one, and this should be, by the name, pretty obvious. So the first one that's actually being provided is Prometheus itself. We're actually going to collect the metrics of Prometheus itself, just so we can check the health and how it's going, right? So that's already been provided. So now what we're actually wanting to do is actually also collect the metrics of Node Exporter, right? And we will add that in a later section. Again, we're just doing this in a logical order. Grafana, get Prometheus set up, and then we can sort out Node Exporter. But for the time being, this configuration is going to set up Prometheus and just collect the Prometheus metrics, okay? So you should just, since we're using localhost here on port 9090, if you're still using 9090 for your Prometheus deployment, this will collect the metrics for Prometheus. So we can save this, right? And we're all good. So again, we have the Prometheus YAML file, which we'll come back to later. And we have the Docker Compose file. So making sure we're in the Prometheus folder where our Docker Compose file is, all we need to do is do a Docker Compose up-d. And this will start Prometheus. And now we have Prometheus deployed, nice and easy. And if we want, we can actually go to that port of 9090 and we'll hit the Prometheus UI. So this is the Prometheus UI that I have all stood up. So here we can actually check any information we have in here. So if we go to something like status and then targets, we can see that we already have a target here and the state is up because this is our local Prometheus. So this is our local Prometheus job that's up and running. So it's up. We can see when it was last scraped for metrics. And again, it shows it's all up and healthy. So this is just where we can make sure that Prometheus is working and it's able to reach its targets. But again, we're not going to use any of the graphs or any of the stuff here because that's where Grafana is coming in. But this is the key point, just to make sure our Prometheus server is up and running. So if you can see this, you are good. So we have our Grafana set up and we have Prometheus up and running. And at the moment, it's just collecting its local metrics, but that's fine. So we're all good. So number 3, Node Exporter, okay? This is where we are now going out and going, hey, look, we want to grab the metrics from our server and feed those into Prometheus, okay? So Node Exporter is the service we will use for that. So let's jump into getting Node Exporter. And this doesn't run as a Docker container. Now, I'm pretty sure you can use Node Exporter as a Docker container, but for this one, we are just going to use a binary file. So this is the information that I'm going to be using and following along with. So yeah, if you're following along either with me or the documentation, it's all going to be provided. So the first thing that we're actually going to go out is grab the latest release of Node Exporter, and you can easily find that by the GitHub link here. I'll just zoom in a bit. So if any of this is confusing, just follow along. I've got you, don't worry. So let's just have a quick read here. So it's just saying here, hey, look, we're going to grab the Node Exporter, and it's a binary, but just make sure that you're grabbing the right one for your architecture. So if you're running this on like a Raspberry Pi, you're going to want the ARM release, okay, not the AMD 64 release. So you'll just change that, but the versions and stuff are fine. If we want to see what the latest version is, we can click on this link, and that will take us to their GitHub page. And we can see that the latest is 1.70, and my documentation where what I was referencing for this is quite outdated. So we're not going to be using 1.3.1, and I do make a note there that just grab the latest version. So we'll copy this command, but we'll change that to the latest version again, which was 1.70. I'll also make sure that's updated before I release the video, just to make it easier for you. So we'll grab this, right, and we'll go back to our server, and what we'll do is we'll just change back to our home, right? So we're just in the home directory, and let's just grab that, and we'll paste that command, paste that. So what this is going to do, wget is just going to go grab that zip file, right? So it's going to be a zip file, and we're going to have to unzip it, but that's fine. We can do that. So let's just hit enter, and it's going to go out and grab that file. There we go, it's downloaded. So if we just do an ls, we can see we now have a zip file, okay? Let's just tidy up the screen a bit. So there's our zip file. So if you've gotten this far, awesome. That's great. So what we're going to want to do is unzip it. I have this in my documentation again. So what we want to do is grab tar xvf. So that's going to unzip that tar file, or untar, or whatever it's called, and it's going to put it in its own folder. So we can just grab tar xvf. So if we do that, and then just hit N, and then tab, so node, there we go. So it's auto-populated. So we're just going to unzip that essentially and hit enter. And now if I do an ls, we now have a new folder, okay? So we have that node exporter file. So if we change directory into that and do an ls, we now have our binary that we're going to use. So this is going, if we literally went /node exporter, this would run, and it would start grabbing the metrics, and we would have metrics being exported. But what we want here is we don't want it just running like this or running in the background, because if our server restarts, our metrics stop coming out and they stop feeding into Prometheus. Well, Prometheus is unable to fetch them, and it's just kind of a pain. So what can we do? Well, we can create a service so that whenever our server is running, it just automatically happens. It's a service that will automatically start. It will make sure that Node Exporter is running, and we don't need to worry about anything. So you do this once, and you just don't worry about it. And this is just a better way, rather than just running it as is. Again, this is all explained in my documentation. So what we're going to want to do is actually, if I zoom in to make this easier for you to read, what we're going to want to do is move the Node Exporter binary, right, to this directory here. Okay, so our user local bin. That's where we're going to want to copy that file. So I'm just going to copy that section. And here, what we want to do is, and we'll do sudo. So we're going to copy. Well, in this case, I can just move it, which is the Node Exporter. And where this is going is user local, right? Where all the binaries go. Now, if I do an ls of that, so user local bin, we can see that we have Node Exporter sitting in there, right? So we've done that part. So it's now sitting in the user local binary folder, ready to be used for the service. So as long as you got in that far, that's great. And what we can do is we can actually change directory owner here and clean up a little bit. So we can just do, I'm just going to sudo rm, the Node Exporter. Actually, no, I want the folder first. Great. So we just clean that, and we can remove the Node Exporter tar file. So it's nice and clean now, so we don't have any random junk left over. Clear the screen a little bit. Okay, we're getting there. We're nearly there, I promise. So we have Node Exporter sitting there. So let's go look at the documentation for the next steps. So now what we need to do is create a dedicated user for running our Node Exporter. Okay, so what we're going to want to do is create a new user. Okay, so we're going to want to create a user, and they're not going to have a home directory or anything. They're purely just for running the service. And this is going to be called Node Exporter. That's what their name is, okay? This user. So we can essentially just copy this and paste it into our server to create the user. So we're going to do sudo user add. They're not going to have a home directory, and they're going to be called Node Exporter, okay? So we'll hit enter, and that's just created that user for us. Coming back to the documentation, we're now also then going to say, hey, look, the Node Exporter user and the group, which is Node Exporter here and Node Exporter group, is going to be the owner of that Node Exporter binary, okay? So that's the only thing that they're going to have permission to actually use and run, and that's great. So we're going to copy that, paste that in here, and hit enter. And now that user has permission to run that binary, okay? And now we need to make the service. Now, I'm hoping I'm not losing you here, but let me kind of just quickly explain this a little bit. So again, we could have just run this locally with our local user in the background, and we're good to go. And then if our server restarts, then we just have to restart it each time. You can do that, but what we're doing here is we're just making this part of our service in the background. We do this once and we forget about it and we don't have to do it again. This Node Exporter user and this binary will run, and the service will continue to be running as long as we don't stop it, and it just happens in the background. Okay, so we do this little bit of work now so we don't have to worry about it later. So here we go with another command. So now we're creating this service. We're telling our Linux distribution, hey, this is how we are wanting to set up our service. And all that's happening here is we're pretty much saying about the service that's going to be happening. It's going to be called Node Exporter, and we are going to create, and the user is Node Exporter, as well as the group, which is called Node Exporter, and the binary that we are running lives in the user local bin Node Exporter. Okay, the user local bin, and the binary is the Node Exporter. So it's going to make sure that it runs that, and if it has any issues, it will let us know. And then it's set to restart always. So if it's shut down or whatever reason, it's going to make sure it restarts it. And it's going to check that every 3 seconds. So we can copy this. I've provided this all for you, and providing that you've followed the steps step by step, this should all just be copy and paste for you. So let's make this file first. So it's the sudo nano service file, enter, and now we have that new file. Make sure you're using sudo here. We grab the contents of this here, and we paste it in. All right. So I've just explained all of this to you, but again, if you're really keen to check out, go onto the Node Exporter website and have a look at the documentation. All of it is going to be in the description as well. So I really encourage you to check it out as well, just so you understand it a bit more as well. So we'll save this, we'll close out of it. So we have that Node Exporter service file set up, and we're telling our system how we want that service to work. So we've saved it, and now we're on our final steps. We're nearly there. So what we need to do now is just get the daemon to reload. So we're going to copy this, paste that in. Right. So it's going to pick up our new system file, our node exporter.service. We're now going to enable it as a service. So this will continue to run, and it's there. So we can disable it and nothing's going to happen, right? But we're going to enable it. Hit enter. Now, if you don't want this to run, easiest way to turn it off is to change that to disable. So it's created that symlink here, and we can see this looks all good. And now we're going to start the service. And don't worry, we're also going to check to make sure it's healthy and actually working as well. So let's paste this, and now we're going. If our service is set up correctly, this should start. We'll hit enter. So now let's check the health. Right, so I've just cleared up the screen. So now we've got that service all set up. So now we can check the status, right, and make sure it's actually running. So if we hit enter, we can now see that it is active and running, which is great. And we can see that we've got some logs here as well. So as long as you're seeing this, great. Now, if you've had any issues with getting to this point, give it a bit of a restart, see if that kicks it in, and then check the service again. If you've got any issues again, jump into the Discord or ask below, and I'm more than happy to help out. But if you've made it this far, that means we have Grafana running. We have Prometheus running, and we have Node Exporter running. So what is next? Now all we need to do is link all 3 together to get some awesome graphs and to be able to track and monitor all of our devices. So what next? So we can close out of this. Great. So what we're going to do is we're going to clear this up a bit, and we're going to go back to our Prometheus container. Okay, so we're going to change into my Docker Prometheus. You remember this? So we'll change directory into Prometheus, where that config file is. So what we're going to do is we're going to sudo nano Prometheus file, and we're going to tell it that there's actually a new job that we want. So hyphen job underscore name, and give it a name. So what we're going to call this is something descriptive, so we know. So this is my alzim server, so we will just do alzim underscore metrics for the job name. Actually, no, I'm just going to call it alzim because that's all that's going to be running. So feel free to call yours whatever you like. And the next one is another hyphen, and we're going to give it a target. And for this one here, what we're going to do is put some square brackets here, and we are going to put in the IP address of our server. So in this case, it's just on the Alzim server, so I could just have this as the local host, but I'm just going to show you that this is the same for anything. So if you had Node Exporter running on another server, you can have as many jobs as you want. So you can copy and paste this structure of job name target for all of your servers running Node Exporter. So you would have to do is put the IP address and the port of Node Exporter here, and that's all you need. So I'll just show you that. So I just grabbed it from my documentation and paste that in. So what we've got here is the job name, right? So Alzim, this is the job for my Alzim server, and this is the IP address of my Alzim server, and 9100 is where the Node Exporter container is running. That's grabbing, or sorry, the Node Exporter service is running. That's grabbing, that has all those metrics. Okay, right, almost it's a bit. So we need to have that static config. Again, all of this is provided for you, so don't worry about that. So we just need the job name, static configs, and then the target, right? So, and you can just rinse and repeat this 3 times. So if you wanted to, you could copy this, make a new one, paste, and change that name, change the IP address where your other Node Exporter is running on a server, and it's just rinse and repeat. Also, I didn't note this, if you want to check your Node Exporter is actually working, what you can actually do is just curl that port on /metrics. So if we hit enter, we can actually see we're getting a bunch of metrics on that. So that's another way to confirm that your Node Exporter service is working. So all of that's been fed to our Prometheus server now. So while Prometheus is grabbing all of that information. Awesome, right? Okay, so we have Prometheus set up to grab the metrics from Node Exporter, okay? So those two are now set up. So now all we need to do is go to Grafana, tell Grafana where all of our data is, all of our metrics, and then we can actually make some cool dashboards. So now let's go back to Grafana. So now we are at Grafana. So we have our Prometheus set up, we have our Node Exporter all set up. So now we need to add our data source. So if we click here, we can see that Prometheus is actually just the first one. So we're going to click on Prometheus. Now it wants to know, hey, where am I going to grab these? Where's your Prometheus server at, right? So all we need to do is do HTTP and give it the IP address of our server that's running Prometheus. So in this case, I'll quickly grab that, and Prometheus runs on port 1990. So there, we don't have any authentication for it, so that's fine. We can leave everything as default, and we can do a save and test. And there you can see we successfully queried the Prometheus API, so Grafana can talk to Prometheus. Great, so we have that all set up. So if we come back to home, should all now be set up. So we can create our first dashboard. You can see that's the second sort of thing in our basic setup. And what we can do is we can either set up our own dashboard, right? Or we can actually import dashboard. Now I do this because I'm lazy and I'd rather just, someone's already done the hard work for me. So I'm just going to import the dashboard instead. So let's click import dashboard. And the easiest way to find dashboards is if you just come here and just look up Grafana dashboards. Enter. And we'll go down, click here. And people have them all here. So the one I like is called Node Exporter Full. So if we click here, and what they give you is, we just need this ID. I'll zoom in a bit so you can see, but on the right hand side, all we need to do is click copy ID to clipboard, click here. Go back to our Grafana instance, paste that here and click load. And there we go, it's pulled that, and the name of our dashboard is Node Exporter Full. Feel free to change it if you like, but I'm just going to import that. Oh, sorry, I have to select a Prometheus data source, which we have because we imported it. And now we can click import. Right, so we've got this here and we've got Prometheus as our data source, which is great. And job here, which is none. We'll just give it a bit of a refresh. Just wait for Prometheus to kick in with our job. Should come through pretty quick. If you're always curious if Prometheus can actually see your information, we can come here and in your Prometheus dashboard, which I showed you, and you should actually see your new target. So you can see that, yep, it's picked up Alzim just fine. So Grafana's just taking its sweet time, but there we are. So our data source, which is Prometheus, and if we click our Zim, hopefully Prometheus has all of our metrics now, and if I click this, it should autofill. So if I scroll this down a bit, There we go. So let's just scroll this down. Great. We can see the data on the side, and we can change the refresh. So there's no, the auto refresh is off at the moment, but let's change it to every 5 seconds. Also, don't forget at the top right hand where it says save dashboard, make sure to save your dashboard. So any changes you make. But there we go. So we've just seen the dashboard just change a little bit, and now we've got some new metrics points, right? So we can see this starting to come through. So let's change this rather than 24 hours, let's change it to 15 minutes. And now you can see all of our data is coming through now, and we get some CPU information coming through. We've got the memory coming through, the disk space. Now some of these might be empty. Your server might not be exporting certain metrics, but most of them should be populated. We can see the network traffic, disk space being used, and all of the areas here, you know, all the partitions and whatnot. Disk ops, and we've got memory information here. So as you can see, this is a pretty comprehensive dashboard for all of our metrics. So yeah, that is how you set up Grafana, how you set up Prometheus, and then you set up your Node Exporter service. Like I just mentioned, I know this was a lot to cover, but we got there in the end. So we've set up, like I just mentioned, Grafana as a Docker container. We set up Prometheus as a Docker container, but we can control all of the configuration via that YAML file and running that command if your configuration doesn't come through, just to give that container a bit of a refresh. And then we've got the Node Exporter service up and running. Again, if you get stuck, if you've got any questions on how something's working, I'm more than happy to go into more detail with you. If I go into great detail into every aspect in a video, it's going to be like 3 hours long. So I kind of just get straight to the point, and then more than happy to answer questions as we go. But if you got to this point and your dashboard is looking like mine, congratulations. If you got stuck, head to the Discord, head to the YouTube comments, and I will help you there. But thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for all the support, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.